The courtroom was colder than usual. I could feel the weight of the room pressing against my chest as I stepped inside. My name is Grace Montgomery and I'm 68 years old. That morning, I was supposed to be in my kitchen sipping my coffee, listening to the morning news and sorting through my bills. Instead, I found myself in this cold, sterile room, facing something that felt as foreign to me as the very concept of betrayal. My daughter, Emily, was sitting in the front row next to her husband, Chris. She didn't even glance in my direction when I entered. Her eyes were glued to the floor, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. Chris, on the other hand, was as self-assured as ever, sitting with his arms crossed, wearing that smirk I had grown to resent over the years. It was the kind of smirk that said, "I've got everything under control," and it made my stomach churn. Then the judge entered and the room fell silent. His gaze swept over the crowd, pausing on me for a moment before his eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Montgomery?" His voice trembled slightly and a hush fell over the room. I didn't understand at first why his reaction seemed so confused, but then the judge spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Is it really you?" I froze. "Sir." The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken meaning that I couldn't grasp at that moment. Emily and Chris were both staring at me now, confusion and shock etched across their faces. No one in that room had any idea who I was, or who I had once been. And that's when I realized this trial, this moment, wasn't just about a house or money or betrayal. It was about the truth of who I was and the secrets I had kept hidden for years. The truth is, my life hadn't always been this way. I hadn't always been the woman standing at the center of this courtroom, being scrutinized by strangers and betrayed by my only child. For the longest time, I was just a small-town woman living in a modest home, making ends meet as a school secretary. I didn't have much, but I had what mattered: family. Or so I thought. I was married to Walter Montgomery for 43 years. He wasn't perfect, but he was the best man I could have asked for. He worked long hours at the local auto shop and we lived frugally, never indulging in luxuries, but we made it work. We had a daughter, Emily, whom we raised with everything we had. I worked long hours at the school, taking on extra shifts to make sure Emily would never go without. I wanted her to have a life filled with opportunity, the kind of life Walter and I could never afford. By the time Emily was in high school, I had given up almost everything. My own dreams of going back to school, of finding something outside of my routine job, just to provide for her. I never once regretted it. I thought she was my purpose, my reason for working so hard. I poured everything I had into her future. But then something changed. When Emily graduated college and married Chris, the man she called her soulmate, I thought my life would shift into a new chapter, one where I could finally slow down. I imagined visits from my daughter, family dinners, holidays filled with laughter, and grandchildren running through the halls of our home. But that dream quickly faded. Instead of growing closer, Emily began to pull away and Chris was no help. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was busy. She had a career, a new husband, and a life of her own. But as the months went by, I started to notice the subtle shifts. Her calls became infrequent. The text she used to send me, just checking in, became rarer and more perfunctory. And then one day she stopped coming over for Sunday dinners altogether. I convinced myself it was just a phase. She had a lot going on, right? But deep down I knew something was wrong. I knew my daughter, knew the girl who used to run to me for comfort, and the woman she was becoming was different. I remember the day it all came to a head. It was a Wednesday in October, one of those gray, rainy afternoons that made everything feel dull and lifeless. I had spent all morning making her favorite dish, roast chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans. It wasn't just any meal. It was the meal I had made for every birthday, every family gathering, every celebration. It was the meal that meant home. I set the table with the good china, the one we only used on special occasions. I even found some candles to make it feel festive. But when Emily and Chris walked in, it wasn't the warmth of family I felt. It was something colder, something distant, like a stranger had entered my home. Chris didn't even acknowledge me when he walked in. He just marched past me and slouched onto the couch, picking up his phone. Emily, too, was different. She didn't smile when she saw the table. She didn't hug me or ask how I was doing. Instead, she stood by the door, her face set in a way I didn't recognize. "We need to talk, Mom," she said, her voice tight. I put the turkey on the table, my hands shaking, but I tried to remain calm. "What is it, sweetie? Is everything okay?" Emily looked at me with eyes that no longer seemed familiar. Mom, she began, her words coming out slowly as if she were choosing them carefully. Chris and I have been talking, and we've made a decision about the house. A knot formed in my stomach. I knew in that moment that something terrible was coming. What do you mean, Emily? This house is where we raised you, where we built our family. Emily's expression hardened. I know, Mom, but you can't keep up with the upkeep. It's too much for you. You're not as young as you used to be. The words hit me like a slap in the face. What do you mean by that? We found a better place for you, she said, her voice indifferent. A retirement home. It's got everything you need, health services, social activities, everything. You'll be better off there. I felt the air leave my lungs. The room suddenly seemed too small, too suffocating. Emily, this house is my home. Your father built it with his own hands. We've lived here for decades. Chris, who had been silent up until now, looked up from his phone and chimed in. It's for the best, Evelyn. We're just trying to help. I didn't know what to say. My heart was in pieces and my voice barely managed to escape. I don't want to leave. But my words fell on deaf ears. Emily stood there, unmoving, her face a mask of resolve. It's already decided, Mom. You'll be moved by the end of the month. We've already signed the papers for the place. That was it. Just like that, everything I had worked for, everything I had loved was being taken from me. And from the look in Emily's eyes, I knew there was no convincing her otherwise. That night after they left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the walls of the house, at the memories they held. Every picture on the walls, every chair, every room, each one a chapter in the story of my life, the life I had worked so hard to build. And now it was all slipping away. The following day, I decided to do something I should have done years ago. I started searching through Walter's old things. The drawers, the files, everything he had kept hidden away. And then, tucked in the back of his desk drawer, I found it. A file with his name on it, marked important. I opened it carefully, my hands shaking. Inside, there were documents I had never seen before. Financial records, property deeds, investment accounts. And then I found the letter. The one Walter had written to me just 6 months before he passed. It was short, but it explained everything. Walter had been far more successful than I ever knew. He had quietly built an investment portfolio, purchasing properties in the city, properties that were now worth millions. The will stated that I was the sole heir to everything, but it also contained a clause I hadn't expected. If you are reading this, Grace, Walter had written, I am no longer here to protect you, but I want you to know I have secured our future. These properties, this wealth, it's yours, but only if you're strong enough to take it. If anyone, especially Emily or Chris, tries to take this from you, you have the power to stop them. Use it wisely. My heart raced as I read the letter. Walter had seen something in Chris. He had known. And now it was time for me to fight back. The discovery of Walter's hidden wealth was the kind of revelation that could break a person, or rebuild them. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the realization that I didn't have to accept the fate that Emily and Chris had handed me. I didn't have to just roll over and let them take everything. I spent the next few days poring over the documents Walter had left behind. It wasn't easy. I wasn't a financial expert, but there were property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements. Everything was there, meticulously organized, as if Walter had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to take the reins when he was gone. The more I read, the more my mind raced. There was the apartment complex on the edge of town that had appreciated in value by 400% in the last decade. The shares in several tech companies. A small parcel of land that Walter had bought years ago. A quiet investment that now seemed poised to make a fortune. But what took my breath away was the clause in the will. It wasn't just a will about property. It was a blueprint for my future. Walter had known what was coming. He had seen how Chris had wormed his way into Emily's life, and he had put everything in place to protect me. If Emily or Chris ever tried to take anything from me, I had the legal right to stop them. The assets, the properties, the wealth, it was all mine. And I realized, with a sharpness that made my hands tremble, that I didn't have to let them push me out of my own home. I wasn't going to go to some retirement community. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to let them win. The next Sunday, Emily called, her voice tentative. She hadn't called me in weeks, not since that night. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I refused to let it show. Mom, can we talk? she asked, as though nothing had changed. I didn't answer right away. The kitchen felt colder somehow, as if it knew what was coming. Of course, sweetie, I said, my voice steady, calm. When do you want to come by? She suggested later that afternoon. I agreed. When she arrived, I could see the nervousness in her posture. She wasn't the same confident woman who had barged in with Chris that day. Today she was unsure, tentative, like she knew something had shifted. I made tea, something familiar, something that felt right, and we sat at the kitchen table. There was silence between us, heavy and thick. She avoided my eyes at first, but then she looked up. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I know it was sudden and I didn't mean to hurt you. But you have to understand, I was just trying to look out for you, she said, the words tumbling out as though she were rehearsing them. I didn't speak at first. Instead, I focused on my tea, the steam rising in front of me, the quiet hum of the house filling the space between us. You were trying to look out for me? I asked, finally breaking the silence. My voice was soft, almost too soft, but it carried weight. By forcing me out of my own home? By deciding that I couldn't take care of myself anymore? Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I didn't mean it like that. You didn't mean it like that? I cut her off, leaning forward slightly, my gaze sharp. You told me that my house was too much for me, that I couldn't manage it. You told me you found me a place. A place I never wanted, by the way. I watched her face change as the truth of my words sank in. She didn't have an answer for that. I could see the guilt starting to form in her eyes. But I wasn't done. I've had some time to think too, Emily. And you know what I've realized? I took a deep breath, the words coming from somewhere deeper than I expected. You've been so busy trying to help me that you forgot to respect me. You didn't ask me what I wanted. You didn't ask me how I felt. You just decided that your way was the only way. Her face flushed, a mix of shame and frustration. Mom, it's not like that. Chris and I were just worried about you. You're getting older. I didn't want you to be alone. Alone, I said, my voice trembling now, but with something that felt more like strength than sadness. I've been alone for a long time, Emily. And you know what? I've gotten used to it. I've learned how to be on my own. I've learned how to survive without you or anyone else for that matter. The words hung in the air between us. For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She just stared at me, her face a mixture of confusion and sorrow. I'm not going anywhere, I finally said, my voice resolute. And I'm not going to that retirement home. I don't need to be looked after like a child. I've built this life and I will protect it. Emily blinked back tears, but she didn't argue. She opened her mouth, but then closed it again. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. I stood up and walked over to the kitchen counter, where I'd left Walter's will and the papers detailing the properties he had left behind. I picked up the stack and I slid it across the table toward her. You don't get to decide what happens to me, Emily. Not anymore. She reached for the papers, her hands shaking as she flipped through them. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she took in the numbers, the properties, the investments. Mom, she trailed off, unable to find the right words. She had no idea, none at all, about the empire Walter had quietly built. I've had enough of being treated like I don't matter, I said, my voice hardening. I'm not your burden, Emily. I'm your mother. And I won't let you or Chris take that away from me. Her face was pale now, the guilt written across it. I didn't know, she whispered, more to herself than to me. No, you didn't, I said, walking over to the window and looking out at the rain falling steadily outside. But you will now. I could see the weight of my words sinking in. Emily sat there for a while, just staring at the papers in front of her. The silence stretched on. I wasn't sure what came next, but I was finally done with being passive, done with letting others take control of my life. I had the power now, and I wasn't about to let go of it. The days that followed Emily's visit were a blur of emotions, guilt, anger, and a sense of determination that I hadn't felt in years. I spent hours going through the documents Walter had left behind, each page a reminder of how little I had truly known about the life he had built for us. It was all so overwhelming, yet at the same time, it gave me a clarity I hadn't had in a long time. For the first time since Walter's death, I felt like I was in control. The next week, Emily came by again unannounced. She stood at the door, her expression unreadable. There was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't just coming to talk. She had something planned. But I was ready. Mom, she began, her voice faltering slightly. I've been thinking about everything you said. I didn't realize how much this was hurting you. I was just trying to help, but I see now that I've crossed a line. I didn't invite her in immediately. I stood there for a moment looking at her. I hadn't seen her like this in years. Vulnerable, unsure, almost like a child again. But this time I wasn't going to comfort her. Emily, it's not just about what you did, I said quietly, my tone firm. It's about the fact that you never asked me what I wanted. You just assumed that because I'm getting older I need to be taken care of. I've spent my whole life taking care of others, and now it's time for me to take care of myself. She shifted uncomfortably, but I could see her mind working. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Finally, she said, I didn't know you had all this money. All these properties. I had no idea. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I nodded, acknowledging her statement. No, Emily, you didn't. Your father was always very private about things. But now that you know, I expect you to respect it. I'm not giving up this house. I'm not moving to some facility where you think I belong. Her eyes filled with frustration, and I could see her struggling to hold back tears. But Mom, Chris and I thought it was the best thing for you. I thought it would make your life easier. And you thought you could just decide that for me? I replied, my voice now sharp. You didn't even ask me how I felt. You just made up your mind that I needed your help. Emily's face fell. I was trying to protect you, she whispered. I shook my head. You were trying to control me, Emily. You and Chris have been pushing me out of my own life. You both think you know what's best for me, but you're wrong. There was a long silence between us, and for a moment I thought she might leave the conversation over. But then Emily took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more measured. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted things to be easier for both of us. You don't get to decide what's easy for me, Emily. You don't get to decide what's best for me anymore. She looked down at her feet, clearly ashamed. The weight of the moment seemed to press down on both of us, the house around us thick with years of unspoken words and unresolved tension. I could see that Emily was truly regretful, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I crossed the room slowly, my eyes never leaving hers, and I grabbed the stack of documents Walter had left behind. I slid them across the table toward her, and she took them with trembling hands, her fingers brushing against mine. Look at these, I said quietly. Look at what your father left for me. Look at the life he built. I don't need anyone's help to take care of myself. I've been doing it on my own for a long time. Emily's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. Her face paled as she processed the numbers, the properties, and the sheer amount of wealth Walter had left behind. I didn't know, she murmured again, more to herself than to me. I never knew. You didn't know and you didn't ask, I said softly. But now you do. She stood up suddenly, the papers still in her hands, and walked over to the window, staring out at the rain that had started falling outside. What am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Emily, I said, walking over to stand beside her. But I know one thing. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not giving up this house. And if you truly care about me, you'll respect that. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let out a long, shaky breath, then nodded slowly, as though accepting something she hadn't fully understood before. I'll respect it, Mom, she said quietly. But I want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I just thought I was helping. I know you did, I said, my voice softening. But helping means listening, Emily. It means respecting the choices I make for my own life. I reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. For the first time in months, it felt like we were finally, truly connecting. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And that was enough for me. The days following our conversation were tense, but there was a shift between Emily and me. I could see that she was struggling with guilt and confusion, but she was starting to realize how much I had sacrificed, how much I had done for her throughout the years. I could also see that, deep down, she still loved me. The question now was whether or not she could forgive herself for the damage she had done. But there was something else, something looming over everything. Chris. I had known for a long time that Chris wasn't good for Emily. There was something about him that rubbed me the wrong way, even when they were first dating. He had always been polite, but there was a smugness, a sense of superiority that I couldn't shake. And the way he controlled Emily, making decisions for her, pressuring her to cut ties with her family, wasn't something I could ignore anymore. I knew that if Emily was going to truly find her way back to me, she would have to see Chris for who he really was. But that was a much harder conversation to have. The days after Emily's visit were quiet, almost too quiet. There was a palpable tension hanging in the air, and though we didn't talk about it, I knew she was still struggling with what had happened. She tried to reach out a few times, sending me messages about how much she regretted her actions, but something still felt off. It wasn't just her. It was Chris. He was always there in the background, a shadow that loomed over everything Emily did. I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite her words, Emily was still under his influence. I had known from the start that he wasn't right for her. I didn't have concrete reasons, nothing I could put my finger on, but there was a sense about him that always made me uneasy. When they first started dating, I remember the way he dismissed my opinions with a half smile, as though he knew better than me. And as their relationship grew more serious, I saw how he slowly began to pull her away from her family. He subtly turned her against friends, against old acquaintances, and even against me. But it wasn't until after Walter died that the real changes began. Emily started spending more time with Chris, less time with me. The visits became rare, and the phone calls, once filled with warmth, turned into obligations. At first, I thought it was just the stress of her new life. But now, with the discovery of Walter's wealth, I was starting to see the bigger picture. Chris had always been about control. He knew Emily's weaknesses, her need for approval, her fear of being alone, and he used them to his advantage. I had been too focused on Emily to notice it at first, but now I realized that the real enemy was the man she had chosen to spend her life with. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was a battle for Emily's independence. It was a battle for her to see that she didn't need Chris to make decisions for her, that she didn't need him to validate her every move. But how could I make her see that? How could I expose the manipulations she had been blind to for so long? The answer came sooner than I expected. It was late one evening when I got a call from Emily. Her voice was shaky, her words rushed. "Mom, I need to talk to you. It's about Chris. He's not, well, I don't know what to do." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "What happened, sweetie?" There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been pressuring me. To sell the house. To move to the new place you were talking about. He said it's for my own good, but I don't know anymore. I think he's trying to isolate me." I was silent for a moment, processing her words. Was she finally starting to see it? Was she beginning to realize what I had been trying to tell her all along? "Emily," I said softly, "you have to trust yourself. You have to stop letting him make decisions for you." "I don't know how," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to get out from under his control. Every time I try to talk to him about it, he gets angry. And he's been saying things to me that I don't know how to ignore. I think I'm losing myself, Mom." The ache in my chest grew, but I refused to let her hear the sorrow in my voice. "You're not losing yourself, Emily. You've just been blinded by someone who doesn't care about you the way I do. You've been under his thumb for too long, and it's time to break free." "I don't know if I can," she whispered. You've always been strong, but you've been looking in the wrong places for strength. You've been looking to Chris for approval, but you don't need him to tell you what's best for you. You're your own person, Emily. It's time you started acting like it." She was silent for a moment, as if my words were sinking in. Finally, she said, "I'll try. I don't want to keep living like this." "I know you don't," I said gently, "but you have to do it for yourself. No one else can do this for you." The next few days were a whirlwind. Emily came to visit again, but this time she was different. Stronger, more determined. It was clear that she had been thinking about what I said, and though she wasn't fully ready to confront Chris yet, she was beginning to see through his manipulation. But the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. Later that week, Chris came by the house unannounced. I was sitting in the living room reading through some old family photos when the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. He stood there, tall and imposing, a smug smile on his face. "Grace," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "I need to talk to you." I didn't invite him in. "What is it, Chris?" asked, my tone firm. "I'm sure you've had your little heart-to-heart with Emily," he said, stepping closer. "But I think you're both making a huge mistake. This house, this situation, it's not healthy for her. She needs stability. She needs security. And you're not offering her that. I looked him dead in the eye, unflinching. Don't you dare tell me what's best for my daughter, Chris. You've been manipulating her for years, and I'm done letting you call the shots. His smile faltered just for a moment, but it was enough. You don't know what you're talking about, he spat, his voice low and dangerous. You're just an old woman clinging to her past, refusing to let go. Emily needs to move on, and I'm the one who's helping her do that. Not you. You've been using her, Chris. I've seen it for years, but I never had the proof. Now I do. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you think you can just push me out of the way and take everything from my daughter, you've got another thing coming. His face darkened, and for the first time I saw the real man behind the charming facade. You can't stop me, Grace. I'll do whatever it takes to get what I want. Then you'll have to fight me first, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. I stood my ground as Chris turned and stormed off the porch, his temper flaring. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Chris wouldn't give up so easily. But I had made my point. He wouldn't be able to control Emily forever. Not if I had anything to do with it. The days after Chris left were a blur of tension, silence, and a quiet anticipation of what was to come. Emily began to spend more time with me, but she was distant, unsure of how to move forward. Every conversation between us seemed to have a weight to it, as if both of us were holding our breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. Despite everything, I could see Emily struggling, torn between the man she had chosen to marry and the mother she was beginning to understand once again. She was caught in a battle that she didn't know how to win. But I couldn't sit idly by and wait for her to make the right choice. I had to act. I had spent years giving up parts of myself for others. Walter, Emily, the family. Now it was my turn. My turn to fight for the truth, for the life I had built. And for the daughter I wasn't going to let be swallowed by a man who had already shown how easily he could manipulate her. But I knew that in order for Emily to see the truth, she needed to realize it for herself. I couldn't force her to make the decision, but I could make sure she had the information she needed, the power to decide for herself. That's when I decided to confront Chris head-on. I had to expose him, and in doing so I would give Emily the tools to break free. It wasn't long before I got a call from Emily, asking if I could meet her at a local cafe. I agreed without hesitation, though I had no idea what kind of conversation awaited me. When I walked in, I found her sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Her expression was heavy, like she had been carrying something for a long time and was finally ready to let it out. She looked up when I sat down, her eyes red as if she had been crying for hours. "Mom, I don't know where to start," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to say anything right now if you're not ready," I said softly, placing my hand gently over hers. "But if you want to talk, I'm here." She took a shaky breath, her voice catching in her throat. "I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me. Why can't I just see things for what they are?" I squeezed her hand tighter. "You've been under his control, Emily. For so long, you've been made to feel like you weren't enough, like you couldn't make decisions without Chris. But you can. You've always had the power." Tears welled up in her eyes and she looked away, ashamed. "But he loves me. He says everything he does is for me. How do I reconcile that with what I'm starting to feel?" I gently lifted her chin so she could meet my eyes. "Love isn't about control, Emily. It's about respect. Chris doesn't respect you. He never has. He's been using you, manipulating you into doing what he wants. And you've been so caught up in trying to please him that you've forgotten how to please yourself." "I don't know how to stop it," she admitted. "I don't know how to undo all of this." I could see the pain in her eyes, but I also saw something else. A flicker of the woman I used to know, the woman who wasn't afraid to make her own choices, the woman who wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. "You start by taking your life back one step at a time," I said, my voice steady. "You don't need Chris to make decisions for you. And you don't need his approval to be happy." She wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "I know. I'm just so scared of what he'll do. What if I lose him? What if he leaves me? What if everything falls apart?" "Then it wasn't meant to be," I replied firmly. "If you're truly scared of losing him, then you have to ask yourself, why? Are you afraid of losing the man, or the version of yourself that you've become with him? The version that doubts herself, that second guesses every choice? You need to decide who you want to be, Emily. And you can't do that if you're constantly looking to him for answers. She sat back, digesting my words. The weight on her shoulders seemed to lift slightly, as though the first step toward freedom was finally within her reach. I'm going to talk to him, she said quietly, her voice firm now, like she had made up her mind. I'm going to confront him about everything. I smiled, proud of her for the first time in a long while. I'm with you, Emily. Whatever happens, I'll be here. Later that evening, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised when I opened it to find Chris standing there, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. Grace, he said curtly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there watching him, waiting for him to speak. I don't know what you've been telling Emily, he said, his voice low and dangerous, but you need to stay out of this. You have no idea what's really going on here. I'm doing what's best for her. I'm the one who's been there for her, not you. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Chris, you've been manipulating her. You've controlled everything she does, and you've made her doubt herself. And I'm done letting you do that. He scoffed. You think you can just swoop in and turn her against me? You're wasting your time. She'll always choose me. I looked him dead in the eye, unflinching. Maybe she will, Chris, but I'm not going to let her make that choice out of fear. You've been using her vulnerabilities to your advantage, and I won't let you do it anymore. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. You don't know what you're dealing with, Grace. You're just an old woman clinging to her past. I can ruin you, both of you, if I have to. I stood my ground, feeling a calmness I hadn't felt in years. You can try, but it won't work. Emily's not your puppet anymore. And if you keep pushing, you'll lose her. I can promise you that. His face turned a shade darker, and I could see the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. You don't scare me, he muttered, turning on his heel and heading for the door. But I wasn't done. I reached for the stack of documents Walter had left behind and threw them on the table in front of him. I know all about the game you've been playing, Chris. And if you think you can keep this up, you're sadly mistaken. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at the papers. But he didn't say a word. He simply walked out, slamming the door behind him. I knew that this was only the beginning. Chris wasn't going to give up easily, and I had no illusions about how far he would go to keep control over Emily. But what I saw in her tonight, the strength, the resolve, gave me hope. Emily was finally seeing him for what he was. The question now was whether or not she would have the courage to break free. But I wasn't worried anymore. This wasn't just her fight, it was mine too. And I would fight until the end to make sure Emily didn't lose herself. The days after my confrontation with Chris felt like a storm was brewing. Emily had distanced herself from him, but I knew that the real battle was far from over. It was one thing to realize that Chris was manipulative. It was another thing entirely to break free from him. And though Emily had found the courage to see the truth, I wasn't convinced she was strong enough to act on it yet. I spent those days preparing myself for whatever would come next. I had stood my ground before, against Chris, against the world, but this was different. This time I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for my daughter's independence, her ability to stand on her own 2 feet and make decisions for herself without fearing the wrath of her husband. It was a fight I couldn't lose. One evening Emily called. I knew it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Her voice was low and strained, like she had been holding something in for too long. Mom, I need you to come over, she said, her words almost trembling. Chris, he's gone too far. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He's been threatening me. He said he'd leave me if I didn't sign the papers to sell the house. He says if I don't do what he wants, he'll make sure I lose everything. My friends, my family, everything. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. Emily, you can't let him control you like this. You don't need him to tell you what to do anymore. I know, Mom, she said, her voice cracking. But I'm so scared. I don't know how to get out. What if I lose him? What if I lose everything? I could hear the desperation in her voice, the fear that had been planted in her by Chris. I had heard it for so long, but this time something in her voice was different. She was ready to fight. You won't lose everything, Emily. You'll lose the man who has been keeping you in the dark, but you won't lose yourself. You don't need him. And you never have. I don't know if I can do it, she whispered. You can, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. But you have to choose, Emily. You have to choose yourself over him. You have to let him go. When I arrived at Emily's house, the tension was palpable. The door was slightly ajar and I could see her pacing in the living room, her hands wringing together. She stopped when she saw me and walked toward me slowly, her face pale. I don't know what to do, Mom, she said, her voice barely audible. He's so angry, and I'm terrified of losing him. But I can't keep living like this. You won't lose him, I said, taking a step closer. Not if he really cared about you. If he truly loved you, he wouldn't try to control you like this. He wouldn't threaten to leave you over something like this. Emily's face crumpled and she sank into the couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I don't know who I am without him, Mom. I don't know who I am anymore. I sat beside her, wrapping my arms around her, holding her close. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was holding the daughter I had once known. The one who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself, who wasn't afraid to live her own life. You are Emily Montgomery, I said softly. You are strong and you are worthy of love, not control. You don't need him to define you. You've always been enough. She sobbed harder, but it wasn't just pain I saw in her tears. It was a release, a letting go of something that had been weighing her down for far too long. For the first time in a while, I saw hope in her eyes. I can't do this alone, she whispered. You don't have to, I said, pulling her into another tight hug. I'm right here. Always. That evening, Emily and I sat down together, and we began to go through the papers that Chris had been pushing her to sign. The documents he had drafted for the sale of the house. The pressure he had placed on her to give up everything for his benefit. As I watched her read through them, something shifted in her. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate as much as she had before. The woman I had raised was beginning to come back to me. I'm done, Mom, she said suddenly, her voice clear. I'm done being his puppet. I smiled, a tear slipping down my cheek. I'm proud of you, Emily. This is your choice now. Not his. Not anyone else's. Just yours. The following days were a whirlwind. Emily confronted Chris, and the confrontation was everything I had feared it would be. He didn't take it well. He stormed out of the house, his threats only growing more intense as he realized he was losing control over her. But Emily stood her ground. She called his bluff, refusing to give in any longer. And for the first time in their marriage, she put herself first. Chris didn't leave without a fight. He made threats, made accusations, and tried to manipulate Emily with the very tactics he had used for years. But Emily had seen through it all. She had heard it all before, and this time she wasn't listening. When Chris finally left for good, Emily turned to me and we shared a look that spoke volumes. The weight had been lifted. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something that would take time, effort, and healing. But it was Emily's life to rebuild, and I would be there every step of the way. Several months later, Emily stood in the kitchen making coffee as I entered. The house felt different now, lighter, filled with new memories. She was a different person now, too. She had started therapy, begun reconnecting with old friends, and most importantly, she was learning to trust herself again. The healing was slow, but it was happening. You're doing great, Emily, I said one morning as I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around the room. She smiled, a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside. I know, Mom. And I couldn't have done it without you. I didn't do anything, I replied, my heart full. You did it all. You chose yourself. And that's the hardest part. Emily sat down across from me, her coffee in hand, and we sat there in silence for a moment, simply enjoying the peace. We've come a long way, haven't we? She said, breaking the silence. We sure have, I said, smiling at her. But we're not done yet. And we'll keep moving forward together. I know the road to healing isn't easy, and sometimes it feels like we're up against the world. But if there's one thing I've learned from everything that's happened, it's this. It's never too late to reclaim your power. Whether it's standing up to a loved one who's crossed a line or finding the courage to choose yourself over everything else, take that step. You are stronger than you think. If my story has resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you were losing yourself or battling a situation that felt impossible to break free from, know that you're not alone. Let me know in the comments, how have you found the strength to stand up for yourself? And if you're ready to take back control of your life, don't wait any longer. Subscribe to my channel, share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Together we can keep growing stronger. Remember, the power to change your story has always been in your hands. You just have to believe it.